Hi, welcome to The Inner Way. I'm your host, Father David Smith. We've been studying very slowly the great spiritual classic, Unseen Warfare, which I hope you have enjoyed as much as I have. I've studied this book many times in my life. I find it to be very straightforward and simple, but at the same time, it really has application to people who do not live in monasteries. Sometimes the other spiritual classics that I read, the writings of the fathers, say from the Philokalia and so on, sometimes they really are written pretty much only for monastics. And I find their advice to be a little bit beyond me. I do my best in the situation I live in, but I don't live in a community of priests or a community of monastics. And so I find it a little bit difficult, as all of us do, to follow the guidelines that are more for monastics than for people outside of monasteries. Unseen Warfare is different. It has that element in it, but it certainly speaks to anybody in any situation. The chapter I'm looking at today, or we're looking at today, chapter 35, I think especially, this applies especially to this chapter. And I'm going to use my podcast that I'm doing now, a podcast on ancient faith radio called Watchful Eating. Maybe someday this will be published as a book, I don't know, but I want to use that sort of as a springboard, or use chapter 35 really as a springboard to talk about watchful eating, not because I'm trying to sell it, but because this is an area that I have struggled with in the past, and we're talking in this chapter about how to struggle against passions. In fact, the title of chapter 35 is Some Indications Useful in the Work of Overcoming Passions and Acquiring Virtue. So that's what I've done in Watchful Eating, is try to say, I'm going to look at one particular passion in my life, one particular habit, temptation, and I'm going to try to overcome that specifically, and other ones will follow, but I'll learn a lot about overcoming passions by focusing just on one of them. This particular chapter begins, although I have already told you a great deal about the means to use in overcoming passions and acquiring virtue, there remains something else to be said about it. And if you've been with me throughout all of these videos, you know it almost seems like we've covered it all, and yet this chapter does have some wonderful advice for us. He divides the chapter into six pieces of advice, six ideas, six parts, really, and let's take them one at a time. The first one really talks about that idea of focusing on one particular problem in our lives, not looking at all of them at once. I have been criticized in the past for in my watchful eating journey of just looking at one particular problem that I'm having and not looking at all the other ones, that we should be looking at all of them. I like the first part of chapter 35. I'm not going to read from the beginning of the beginning of the paragraph, but a little bit down. Take up arms preeminently against the passion which troubles you most, which has often conquered you, and which is ready to attack you again now. Fight it with your whole strength, and strive to establish yourself in the virtue opposed to that passion, using for this purpose all suitable practices and tasks. For as soon as you succeed in this, you will, by this very fact, bring to life all other virtues in yourself, and will be clothed in them as in armor, which will then protect you from all the arrows of passions. So this has been my point all along in terms of my struggle with developing a rational and spiritual relationship to food and eating. And that is that if I look at one particular problem I have, I can address that problem. I can actually get someplace with that. And I will find that other virtues will become part of my life. It's not as if, I say in the podcast, it's not as if I can say, well, I was very careful in my eating today, so it doesn't matter if I judge other people, because I'm not concentrating on that. It's not like that at all. But indeed, as Unseen Warfare says, that once you begin to become fluent in overcoming one temptation, you develop the ability, the language ability to overcome other temptations as well. What a great piece of advice. The second part, he quotes from the St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, I press toward the mark. And so he's really talking about when we decide what vice we're going to attack, what virtue we're going to acquire, that we need to continually push toward that. During the paragraph, it says, by stopping, now he talks about the opposite. You push toward the mark and you avoid stopping. So this is what he's talking about. By stopping, I mean imagining that the virtue is already gained in its perfection, and so paying no attention to its deficiencies and neglecting chances of good actions. Be not like that, but be always watchful and zealous. So one of the things, I can again use watchful eating as an example. One of the things that has challenged me has been, times of feasting. When I kind of, come to the end of a fast, the Nativity fast, or Lent, or the Theotokos fast, I'll come to the end of a fast and I'll say, you did pretty well. You've really overcome this particular passion. And, I feel good and so on. And now it's time to break the fast and it's time to, eat whatever I want and so on. And I end up going back to what to the attitudes I used to have before. That cannot be done. That's what he means by stopping. We pat ourselves on the back and we say, I have acquired the virtue that I want to acquire, so I can relax now. Maybe I can stop worrying about this particular temptation and I'll concentrate on a different one or something like that, and you end up getting yourself in trouble and losing the ground that you've gained. The third part talks about this. This is a prominent theme in Unseen Warfare, and that is the patting of ourselves on the back, the complimenting of ourselves. And I'll begin right at that beginning of that paragraph. Thirdly, Be wise and sensible in undertaking tasks for the body, fasts, vigils, physical work, and so on. They are necessary and essential, and do not imagine you can progress in the spiritual life without them, but you must be wise in knowing your measure and keeping to it. What is he talking about there, knowing your measure and keeping to it? This is really referring to that sense that when we strive in the spiritual life and we make a little bit of progress, that we attribute that to ourselves, rather than calling out to God for help. And then when we receive that help, calling out to God in thanks. We call out to God for help, receive the help, and then, take a bow to the unseen audience that's around us, clapping their hands. Yes, I did pretty well with that, didn't I? It's always a danger for us to think of ourselves as having done something wonderful when we achieve something in the spiritual life, when in fact every single thing that happens to us spiritually is a gift from God. The fourth piece of advice he has is very interesting. I'm going to read the opening of that paragraph. Fourthly, acting thus, think with all the power of your thought, wish with all the strength of your desire, and seek with your whole heart one thing only, to overcome the passion you are battling with at that particular moment, and which is attacking you now, and to reestablish in its full strength the virtue opposed to it, which is at present stifled. This one thing should be for you the whole world, all heaven and all earth, all your treasure and your final aim, in the conviction that by this alone can you worthily serve God. This is what I call the living in the moment. Don't worry about what the past is. Don't worry about what the future is. Can you really overcome the temptation that you are focusing on? When I first started my watchful eating journey, I thought to myself, how long is this going to last before I let it go? And I was thinking long term. And better not to do that, but to think only of what's happening right now. Right now, I have the temptation before me. Right now, I know how to overcome that temptation, and I'm going to do that right now and not worry about anything else. This is living in the moment, and this is also really the definition of the word watchfulness. Watchfulness means that we are constantly attentive to the attacks of the demons, that we are constantly attentive to seeking the will of God. When we have that always in our minds, then we are able to overcome temptations as they come to us moment by moment. I know that when I was starting the watchful eating journey, it came to me that there were certainly times of the day when I would just stop thinking about spiritual things. When I would say, okay, I'm done with spiritual things now, I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to, go to the store and get something for dinner. I'm going to go home and make dinner. I'm going to sit and, watch some sports on television. I'm just going to do these kinds of things now, without continuing the watchful attitude. This is what the fourth step says, is be careful to watch and be careful. The fifth one, again, I'm going to read from the beginning of the fifth paragraph. Fifthly, be an implacable enemy of all earthly comforts and sensory pleasures which are born of self-indulgence, and feed it. Through this, you will be less often subject to attack, not only by carnal, but generally by all passions, for they are all rooted in self-indulgence. When self-indulgence is subdued and cut off, they lose their power, stability, and firmness, since they have no foothold. This is the phenomenon of us rewarding ourselves. Rewarding, or what I call vacation. I don't have to pack my bags and fly off someplace to be on vacation. Sometimes I go home at night and I'm on vacation, and I'm not thinking about things, and I'm not being watchful and so on. And I have an out to lunch attitude. And usually at those times, I think about something in particular that I want to do that is like a vacation, that is like I'm off the clock now, and I'm going to plan for those things. I'm going to go out to a nice restaurant, or maybe not a nice restaurant, but a restaurant where I like the food, and I'm going to go there, and I'm just not going to think about anything. See, it's that attitude that I'm going to indulge myself now. It gets us into addictions. And very often when I'm talking to people who have addictions, there's a sense of saying, this is what I do when I relax. This is what I do when I'm off the clock, when I'm done working. This is the thing that I do that just kind of lets me rest my mind a little bit. And that's the thing that needs to be overcome. Not necessarily the addiction itself, although that's usually a problem, but it's that the attitude of saying, this is what I do when I relax. I deserve to relax many times during the day. I really deserve this. And so that becomes a habit after a while, and it becomes very difficult to overcome. The last one, the sixth one in chapter 35, sixth piece of advice. I'm actually going to read the whole sixth paragraph. Sixthly, finally, I give you this last advice. It is very useful, or rather absolutely necessary, for you, first of all, to begin with a general confession, with all due attention and all the required practices, examinations, and decisions, so that through this your soul should be filled with the firm conviction that you stand in the grace of God, the sole giver of all spiritual gifts, virtues, and victories. We begin with confession. This is the sacrament, the tool in our lives, which is often overlooked because it's something that we have to pursue. We have to schedule. I have to contact my spiritual father, check his schedule, make an appointment, and then go to that appointment. And hopefully I'm healthy and he's healthy and the weather is okay, and so on and so forth. And we have to it's something that you have to plan for, but it is worth planning for it, because when we go to confession, this is a mystery of the church, mysterion. It is something where the grace of God comes into our lives and changes us. The sins we confess are no longer remembered by God. They are completely gone from his mind, and our souls are clean. This is the best place to start when we are looking at overcoming temptations and acquiring virtues. Well, brothers and sisters, my last couple of videos have been pretty long, and I didn't have one last week because I was sick. But we are going to get together next week. Holy Week is coming up for us in the Orthodox Church, and so I may miss doing a video during Holy Week, but certainly we will continue our way through unseen warfare. I hope that you can join us, and until then, God bless you, and I'll see you in church.